Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, the tools that provide more bang for the buck than any other tools in my shop. Look, we all love tools. The problem with them is that they cost money and you can't just run out and buy every single tool in the world all at the same time. So finding tools that provide bang for the buck and just plain old do more than other stuff in your shop, that is money. There is nothing more satisfying than buying a tool to do X and then finding out you can do Y and Z and A and B and all this other stuff. So if you have thoughts on the best values and the most surprisingly useful tools in your shop, leave a note down in the comments. So with no further ado, the most shockingly useful tools in my shop. I'll start right here with calipers. I use calipers constantly. You know, I used to be a big proponent of buying super cheap digital calipers and just chucking them out when they died, which they always do. But now I'm a big fan of buying old-fashioned calipers, you know, dial calipers like these, buying them on eBay used. Whatever, both of them work. Point is, in knife world, 9 times out of 10, you can't just measure something with a ruler. You really need a little more precision than that, and that's where calipers really come in handy. The most obvious use of the tool is to measure, you know, the thickness of stock and, you know, little measurements of your knives themselves. But there are a ton of other things in the shop that you can use them for. The normal thing is that you use these 2 little jaws right here, squeeze them together and get a measurement. But there are a lot of other features of these calipers that you can use to measure all kinds of other stuff. You can use these right here to measure the ID of holes, of pipe, of tube, all kinds of things. You can use this little protrusion down here to measure, you know, basically like a height gauge or a depth mic. You know, there are a whole bunch of different little features that calipers have that everybody's not aware of. And if you kind of study up on those, you'll find out that this is a really elegantly designed tool. You know, many, many decades in the making, I'm sure, back in the 19th century. And the modern calipers are just very, very well designed tools, and you can just do a ton of stuff with them. I own at least 5 or 6 sets of calipers. They're scattered all over my shop. You know, I buy them used on eBay, and that way I never have to hunt around for a pair because there's always one sitting close by. Quick pitch here, if you've been enjoying this channel over the years as I bring you videos about gear, saving money, making better knives, and knife making builds, I'd invite you to jump in and help the channel. How to do it? Patreon. Those of you who help out on Patreon will not only be supporting me so that I can make more and better videos, but you'll get access to plans for most of my builds, as well as access to me if you got questions about the craft of knife making. Patreon.com/Walter Sorrells. Machinist squares. I reach for these all the time. It's the simplest thing possible. 2 pieces of steel, 90 degrees. One piece, this bottom piece here, the bottom of the L, is proud of the other piece, so you can lay it down on things. Works just like a carpenter's square, but they're a little smaller and a little more precisely made. I use them constantly. Need to set up the table on your grinder? Machinist square. Need to cut a clean line on a piece of stock? Machinist square. I was just using one the other day to check the squareness of a guitar that I was making. You know, it's just a hobby type thing. If you do any woodworking, hey, I like these a lot better than your typical woodworker squares. You can buy them all day long on eBay for dirt cheap. Just a great little tool. Hey, what can I say? The humble metal file is the godfather of every single, you know, metalworking tool on the planet. If you learn to use a file well, you can make just about anything, provided you have enough time. But I use them for deburring, cleanup, flattening, all kinds of stuff. If you've watched my videos over the years, you've probably seen a bunch of videos where I make an entire knife using no power tools, and the big hero of those videos is always a metal file. You know, there are tons of different kinds of files. If you just had to buy one, good old Double cut bastard files, probably the way to go, but mill files, round files, chainsaw files, every single one of them is useful. $10, million uses. Cordless drills. Okay, it's not exactly a shockaroony here, but I use my cordless drill constantly. And you know, the funny thing about it is that what I actually do least with it is drill holes. I'm usually going to use my drill press or my mills for that. What I do use them for is, well, just everything else. I built a paint booth a couple months ago, and you know, I use structural screws instead of nails. They got a little star drive in them, and so you just drive those things in, cordless drill. Changing out parts on my CNC machine. I know it's not something most of you guys are doing, but you know, you put an Allen drive in here. That's what I got on here right now, and you know, I can pop things off real fast. Phillips heads, star drives, Allen drives, all that stuff's faster using a drill than using a T-handle wrench or a screwdriver or whatever. I mentioned guitars earlier. I had to drill a hole out of the pickup cavity, and you got to use this big old long bit. Do it this way. You know, it's not very efficiently done on a drill press. This is the king of stuff like that. In the bizarre off chance that you have not joined the cordless revolution yet, you know, these lithium batteries are fantastic. You know, when I first started using cordless drills, the batteries were terrible. They're not anymore. They're very powerful. They hold a charge for a long time. You know, I go weeks, if not months, between charges on these things. So I love it. It's a fantastic tool. I reach for it all the time. So I grew up with a father who was not exactly Mr. Handy guy, and I didn't have a wrench turning type job when I was, you know, first getting started. So when I started making knives a quarter century ago, I just did not have any experience with, you know, kind of professional workshop type environments. And so as a result, I was a total ignoramus about a lot of stuff. As a result, it took me a while to get the religion about compressed air. I got my first compressor probably 20 odd years ago. It was for a particular little tool, and really I just kind of used it for that. And I got a bigger compressor for my first CNC machine, and all of a sudden that just opened my eyes to all these things that you could do with this right here. And you know, just this right here, just cleaning chips and sawdust and all that, just for that purpose alone, compressed air is worth having in your shop. So when I moved out here to my new shop, the first thing that I wanted to do was put a compressed air system throughout the entire shop. Now, every shop does not need that. You know, my previous shop was much smaller, and so I really didn't need something quite this extensive. But when I got out here, it was just so helpful to have air all over the place. You can drive, you know, air tools, obviously, paint sprayers, like I said, just blasting chips and crud off of stuff. You can get monsters like the big one that I have over there, which is the second one that I've got in here. Or you can get little, you know, pancake ones, little bitty things like that. I just love my air. I use it all day long. So this right here is a granite surface plate, a machinist surface plate. The idea is that it's a reference surface that's used for precision measurement. Now, how much do I use it for that? Not that much, actually. Some, but mostly what I use this for is to put pieces of sandpaper on here and flatten things out on there. Professional machinists watching this are probably having conniption fits. These are very precisely made. You can get them in AA, single A, and B or tool room grades. And that is a measure of just how precise that flatness is. If you use abrasives on them, the surface is eventually going to get dinged up, and it's not going to be as precise as a machinist would want it to be. But mostly what I do on here is scribe center lines and flatten things out and stuff like that. For me, measurement is actually kind of like the third most important thing that I do on here. Granite surface plates come as small as this and, you know, as big as baseball fields. Not really, but I mean, they get quite big, and as you can imagine, unbelievably heavy. You can buy them used on eBay. They often cost as much to ship as the price that you actually pay for them. And you know, one of the advantages of doing that is that often they've lost their precision. Maybe they got a chip knocked out of it. They aren't perfect for machinists, but for us knife makers, they're fantastic. Now, a lot of what I use this for could also be done with a piece of masonite or whatever, but I like the knowledge that it actually is a very precise surface, and when I do need that, it's there. So the last two tools on my list are sort of in the no Sherlock kind of category, but it's worth mentioning them nevertheless because they are so clearly in the category that I'm talking about of you get it for this and it turns out to be amazingly useful for a lot of other stuff. So back in the day when I got my first belt grinder, it was a Bader B3, still got it, still use it every day. And I really had no idea how useful the thing would be. Obviously it's great for making knives. Every knife maker in the world has a belt grinder of some sort, whether it's a 1x30 from Harbor Freight or big 2x72s like my Ameribraid or my Broadbent or Bader or whatever. But you know, one of the hidden benefits of knife making is that it takes you into, you know, metalworking, woodworking, machining, metallurgy, blacksmithing, heat treating. So once you start accumulating all these skills, there's just an amazing amount of stuff that you're capable of doing, whether it's for home improvement or, you know, making tools for your friends or just whatever it might be, tools around the shop. There's just so much that you can do with the skill set that you develop as a knife maker. And you know, look, everybody who makes knives gets a charge out of making stuff. So I make all kinds of things that have nothing to do with knife making. I make guitars, you know, I make cutting boards, you know, just all kinds of stuff. And I just always am finding uses for my belt grinders when I'm making all this other stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with knife making. Just the other day, I was making a guitar, an electric guitar body, and I started using my belt grinder in a way. I've made a bunch of guitars over the years, and I just found, hey, look, I can use my belt grinder to do this thing that I never thought of before. And it was fantastic. It was the perfect tool for the job. As a result, you know, buying the best belt grinder that you can afford, man, you will never regret it. It's just the gift that keeps on giving. So I don't own a Bridgeport, you know, the big fancy vertical mills, what they call a knee mill, sort of generically. But I've had this little Inco mill drill for years and years. It's basically a mill, it just doesn't have a knee that rises up and down in the Z. And as a result, it does pretty much everything that a big boy vertical mill will do. It's not really as good. You can mill things flat, you can slot, you can drill, and you can do it all pretty precisely. It's got a DRO, digital readout, so you know exactly where you are. Super useful machine. I mean, really, if I did absolutely nothing with it but drill holes, it'd be kind of worth the price of admission because you can locate holes really accurately, and that's incredibly useful when you're making knives. Now, mills come in a real wide variety of sizes and shapes. They're benchtop models that, you know, you can buy for probably under $1,000. You got Bridgeports that are 20 times as much as that. But they all do the same basic things. They're just, you know, they're made for cutting metal, but you can cut plastic, you can cut wood, you can cut G10, micarta, all, you know, just any kind of material. You can slot, cut, drill, all that stuff, the same stuff that you can do with metal. You want to make folding knives, a mill is just essential. But if that's not your jam, there's still just tons and tons of stuff that you'll find to do with a mill. And the better you get at using it, the more things you find to do with it. One thing that I've been doing more and more of over the years is tool making. Now I've got a CNC machine over there that, you know, when I'm selling these things and I'm making a whole bunch of them, that's what I'm going to use. But when I'm doing a prototype, it's actually faster and easier to do them on the manual mill most of the time than on the big mill. And that goes for just tons of other things that you could do. You need to make something, you know, for your house. Some, you know, part of a door handle or something fails on you and you need to drill some holes in a real precise way. Pop it in the mill, bip, bip, and you're done. Now, I know people who are interested in making knives and they haven't really made the jump yet, see videos like this, and I start talking about all these expensive tools, and mills are expensive. And they start feeling like, oh, well, if I don't buy all these expensive tools, you know, the price of admission is just going to be too high to even think about doing it. You do not need a mill to be a knife maker. You absolutely do not. This is totally bonus territory. But on the other hand, you buy a half-decent mill when you're, you know, 30, 35 years old, you'll be using it when you're 70. So it's just, it's one of those things that, yes, it costs some money up front, but man, the back end is really valuable. Okay, guys, that wraps it up. Not trying to be a tool pimp here, just kind of sharing my perspective. Your thoughts may differ, and like I said, if you've got anything to add on the subject, by all means, leave a comment below. Tell us about the tools that you find most shockingly useful in your shop. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and keep on making those knives. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.